a leadership architect. She's the pastor of our neighbor's house. I've followed her work, and I hope you will too, in Liberia, West Africa, where she is an educator and she's helped found a computer and professionalism school. She resided there for 2 years. And she is really a trainer and an expert in nonviolence, and has done this work in a lot of different places. But at the King Center, she's been one of the trainers with the Center for Nonviolent Social Change, and the entire class. You're going to hear some more about it if you want more than this hour that we're getting with Dr. Vonnetta. Their training is called Nonviolence 365, where Dr. Vonnetta West and others cast a vision for a much more just, humane, and peaceful world, and show us how this nonviolence of Dr. King and others is still, as Dr. King said, the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. And I think, Dr. Vonnetta, as I pass it to you, that, Nelson Mandela said that no one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin or their background or their religion. People learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, then they can be taught to love. We can unlearn hate, right? Because love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite, said Nelson Mandela.
Absolutely.
So this is a spiritual crisis, but this is about formation. It's about training ourselves in the nonviolence and the love. And so train us, Dr. Vonnetta. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to pass it to Dr. Vonnetta West. Thank you, sister.
Thank you so much, Shane. It's my brother. Thank you to Divya and Mary Grace and the RLC team for pulling this all together. I am grateful to be here. Certainly in these times, I was sharing with Shane and Divya and Mary Grace before we got started, we need to be putting more peace, true peace, as Dr. King said, which is not merely the absence of tension, but it includes justice. It's the presence of justice in the atmosphere. So we're not talking about something frivolous when we talk about nonviolence, but welcome to each of you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for participating. I'm hopeful that we'll all be hearing together and learning together as we spend some time exploring what I call, and I'm going to put this up for us, inside out nonviolence. So one of the things I share often as a senior trainer with the King Center is that I believe nonviolence is a posture. It is my determination of who I will be, regardless of what other people are doing. I want to say that again. It is my determination of who I will be, regardless of what other people are doing. It is a challenge to myself to have an internal way of being and an external way of living. An internal way of being and an external way of living. It is very important, I think, in this current hour in human history, that we embrace a strategy, a philosophy, a way of thinking that can unite different faiths, but is rooted in, as Dr. King was, the teachings of Christ. And sometimes, we find that there are attempts to erase that, even in some of our training sessions. That may be something people don't want to dwell on or talk about. It does not take away from any other faith or belief. It's just our assertion that we want to embrace who Dr. King was. And he was a Baptist minister who believed very much in nonviolence as a Christ-like principle and a way that Christ demonstrated to us to be and to engage people. So as much as we talk about him being influenced by Gandhi, his main influence in nonviolence was, in fact, Jesus Christ. But Dr. King, if you ever have an opportunity to read this book of prayers that he has called Thou Dear God, he had this way of including people. And so he would start prayers with things like, we pray to you, God, who some call Brahman. We pray to you, God, who some call Allah. And he would include all of these different names that people have for God. And it's amazing to hear. And again, to me, does not take away from his firm belief in Christ, but it's his effort and his sincere quest to create what he popularized. It's a term founded and first used by Josiah Royce, but became popular under Dr. King's teaching of it, the beloved community. He believed we could create it. I believe that, but I believe that work starts for each of us internally. I think Shane covered all of this, but I wanted to start with an introduction. Here's some of the things we'll go through in this session: the foundation of nonviolence, facets of nonviolence. When there are a lot of schools of nonviolence, just to be clear, when I talk about nonviolence, I'm talking about Kenyan, Dr. King's school of nonviolence, which is still taught and utilized all over the world. And the King Center, as Shane said, has rebranded it as Nonviolence 365. I'll share more with you how you can continue to study if you would like to do that. I came to nonviolence. I'll get into this more in a moment after I go through this, by way of being introduced to Dr. King by my 11th grade public speaking teacher. But I'll get into that more in a moment because I got to share that story. Facets of nonviolence. Who are we everywhere? We'll go through the core values of inside out nonviolence, which are connected to the Kingian principles of nonviolence. Course of action for inside out nonviolence. Internal outcomes and external outcomes. I want us to keep in mind that Mrs. Coretta Scott King said that nonviolence is a spiritual discipline. If you're taking notes, if you're typing in your phone, your device, I want everybody to make note of that. She said it's a spiritual discipline. It's one of the main things about nonviolence that I keep with me, that it's a spiritual discipline. She said it requires a great deal of commitment. She goes on in some of her other teachings to talk about how when we're creating the beloved community, it's the pathway to create it. Great deal of commitment. It's a spiritual discipline. So when I see that someone has said that they're going to participate in something that's nonviolent, then it should also include a sense that I know I'm about to do something where I have to be disciplined. See those photos that we see where people were being attacked by dogs during the civil rights movement? You know, they had to have a spiritual discipline to be attacked by dogs and to stand there. But they weren't lacking courage. They actually had, and we'll go over this in a moment, a vision for an ultimate goal that held them. And they had, we'll talk about this in this session too, soul force. Soul force. They had this soul force where they believed they were working for something higher than themselves, and they had to be disciplined to get there. So it wasn't, oh, these are a bunch of punks out there being attacked and sprayed with water hoses and, these things we see today. This is not our grandmother's movement. It sure is not, because those folks in that movement could take a lick, and because they had an ultimate goal, they would stand in that fire and they would sit at those lunch counters and people would spit on them and call them the N-word, and they would take it. And it wasn't because they lacked courage. It was because they were very courageous and that's White Reverend Richard. Thank you so much for being here. Soul force. If it's one thing I pray for today, for all of us who are in this work of activism and in this work of social change and creating the beloved community and seeking justice, one thing I pray in addition to this is that we redefine justice. The other thing I pray most often is that we have soul force, that we realize that some of the physical violence that we see, if we unite in soul force, there are tactics and procedures and strategies that we can use to overcome physical force with soul force. I know some folks don't believe it, but I've seen it. I saw it in Nashville recently with Reverend Barber, where he started singing Negro spirituals when they weren't going to let him upstairs to the Tennessee House floor. I saw it in action. I've witnessed it. I've been a part of it. where you're facing something that may seem insurmountable, but then comes this soul force. It has to be cultivated, though. It's not like magic. You just all of a sudden have force, soul force. It's a spiritual discipline, as Mrs. King said. I want us to spend some time with this. And if you have any comments you want to share in the chat room just about this definition of inside out nonviolence that I developed, I believe it's a principled way of life and commitment to humane engagement, and it's driven by, cultivated with, and demonstrated for the purpose of inner transformation. Listen, I'm a little older now. I can't believe I'm about to say this, and I'm gonna go back to that story about how I came upon Dr. King's teaching. But I didn't connect the work on the outside with the work on the inside. I don't know if anybody else has ever been like that, where I actually thought I could do all this work to help humanity, and on the inside just be trash. You know, I didn't think that I had to be concerned about inner transformation, and that even when I started to study nonviolence, I didn't quite grasp how I had to let it work on me and how that translated into what I could do for social change. Yeah, that's important. What happens on the inside of me affects what I can do in terms of social change in totality. Sometimes we don't quite believe that, but when we talk in a few minutes about language, I started to hear about this principal way of life as a 17-year-old growing up in Tuskegee, Alabama, with a public speaking teacher who was the sister of one of the Commodores. Now, I want everybody to put a Commodore song in the chat room. If you don't know a Commodore song, we're going to have a music class in addition to a nonviolence class. I'm serious. I need a Commodores or a Lionel Richie song in the chat room. Come on. Somebody. Let's see what we have in there. No, y'all think easy like I'm telling you. 3 times a lady. What else do we have here? Easy, brick house, all night long. There you go. Yeah, I had this teacher who was a sister of Ronald LaPred, who was one of the Commodores who were from Tuskegee, brick house. She assigned to me Letter from Birmingham Jail. Changed my life. Changed my life. I saw Grace in Practice, where Dr. King was responding to a letter written to him by 8 clergy who disagreed with how he was leading the movement in Birmingham. And when I read his response, even at 17, I said, wow, that's powerful. I didn't quite get it, as much as I do now, and I'm still studying it as often as I can. But I began to see principles for communication and for living, even at that age. And so, I still can say now, I believe this inside out nonviolence is a principled way of life, and commitment to humane engagement driven by, cultivated with, and demonstrated for the purpose of inner transformation, yielding outer excellence and influence. And what do I want to influence? Now, these are the difficult things. I want to influence culture, inclusive of relationships. So again, nonviolence, particularly when we talk about spiritual formation and soul force, is not only something I use for social change and that I use to change systems and policies, but I also have to pay attention to my relationships. One of the main places I use nonviolence or I engage it is with my family. I'm the child of a father who was an alcoholic until I was 8 years old. And somehow we had to come to a place of reconciliation. He's changed. My dad's been sober for 40 years. That didn't change the hurt and the things that we had experienced as a family. And as I began to study nonviolence, I began to look at these principles and say, hey, this is, for me, a tangible demonstration of the life of Christ. I can use these principles in order to repair my relationship or get back to, the type of relationship that I always could have had with my dad. So nonviolence, I've seen it for myself, not only helps me with social change, helps me talk to activists here in Metro Atlanta and around the country. They reach out and they say, can you help us craft what we can say in these different situations and what we can do? It also influences my relationships. But we also know it's foundational to some of the change we've seen in this nation in particular, with policies that have been unjust and discriminatory and hateful. Inside out nonviolence. And I hope for us, this is shifting kind of what we thought about nonviolence. I want to grab that real quick. Anybody, when you thought about nonviolence before, what did you think? You share that in the chat room. What did you think about nonviolence? I'm gonna go through here and I'm sure I'm gonna see all these Commodore songs. What did you think about nonviolence before this session? When you heard the word, when you hear it, what are some common misconceptions do you think about what nonviolence is? Passivity? Absolutely. Not resisting. Some people assume it's weak. Yes. All true. Love beyond your evil thoughts. Yeah, we found some other things too. Some people believe that Dr. King and his teachings, even nonviolence, are showing us how to be colorblind. And we certainly believe, I do, that we shouldn't discriminate based on anything. But Dr. King wasn't teaching us to not see people. See, Dr. King believes, and what nonviolence embraces is that I can see you fully. I can see you fully and love you fully. I don't have to act like I don't see who you are, or I don't recognize that you're of European descent, of your African descent, you're Black, you're white, you're Asian. I don't have to look past those things to love you. I can see you fully and love you fully. That's why love is the foundation of nonviolence. When Dr. King taught about it, he talked about how we have to come up with a way to resolve conflict and to learn to live together. And he said the foundation of that way, that method, is love. Now, love, of course, is not this, weak, passive thing that we often talk about. Love shows up. Love refuses to stand for injustice. Love is not something that's just about tolerance. Love goes further than that. Love causes us to say, if that's happening to my neighbor, then I need to do something about that. See, love kind of compels us and fuels us. My sister, my older sister, was talking to me yesterday, and she said, you've been in public service work a long time. I joined the AmeriCorps program after I graduated from college, serving in Metro Atlanta, which caused me to have to travel to some different locations around the country. And I was able to see what a lot of people don't realize, that here in the United States, as Dr. King said, we have the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And I don't believe he just meant that in other nations. I believe he meant we experience in this nation the poverty, the violence of poverty, the violence of, our language, our bullying. We talk about and we see gun violence. And so in that public service work, my sister was saying, you've seen a lot. I'm just seeing some of the things happening in the world. Say, yeah, every day there's injustice. And that's why spiritual formation is important. I want to pause here just on this phrase for a moment, because it's one of the main things for this session, the understanding that we have to have some type of formation spiritually to do this work. And for Dr. King and in the teaching of nonviolence, that could mean a faith, practice, a belief, a religion. But the sixth principle of nonviolence is the universe is on the side of justice. Nonviolence believes the universe is on the side of justice. To me, that principle is an umbrella for all of the other principles, because it helps to guide me in what I do with principles 1 through 5. And so it's a part of my spiritual formation to believe that in the end, there's greatness at work. The divine is at work. And if I get in with the divine, See, that's what these quotes mean to me that I see people throw out all the time. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And it's quoted another way. Sometimes the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That means I got to get in with the arc. That doesn't mean I'm kind of like everything's going to play out the way it's supposed to. Spiritual formation, really, if we can get enough people to start to think and cultivate a spirit of love and an understanding of how we're supposed to show up for each other, then what happens is you have people all over the globe working together, sometimes in pockets, to say, we're going to work with the universe. Now, if you're thinking, Dr. King would never say universe. He was a Baptist minister. It's in his book, Stride Toward Freedom. When he lays out the 6 principles of nonviolence, he actually wrote universe. See, because Dr. King had an ultimate goal. He was trying to create the beloved community. Some of the minutiae that we're often in, he wasn't in that stuff. He was looking at these triple evils of militarism and poverty and racism destroying the world and trying to figure out how do we learn to live together and eradicate these evils. He didn't have time to be somewhere debating, should I say God or could I say universe? He was saying, how can I reach people who can embrace this nonviolence so we can stop ushering in what he called our violent co-annihilation. I want us to pause for a moment and think about how often we're in minutiae as people of faith versus doing the work that we're put here divinely to do. And what would happen if we could focus on our spiritual formation being soul force and having a spirit of sacrifice enough to say, we need to focus on showing each other how we can learn to live together. Think about that language, learning to live together. We need spiritual formation for that. Nonviolence helps with that. And the foundation is love. We know love. That's why I believe God had me name the church that I pastor our neighbor's house, because I was praying about what should we call this church. And I just kept hearing these 2 greatest commandments that Christ said, upon them hinge the law and the prophets. Put all your law and your prophets on this. Love God with everything you got and love your neighbor as though your life depends on it. I paraphrased it. Love God with everything you got. Love your neighbor as though your life depends on it. What if we found ourselves, particularly as the Church of Christ, and started to say, we're going to love God with everything we got, and we're going to love our neighbor as though our lives depend on it. And that's the 2 greatest commandments, this love thing. That's also the foundation of nonviolence. Our soul force is rooted in love. See, love causes us to be able to say, I need to sacrifice something to get to where we want to be. I need to sacrifice something to get to where we want to be. I think if we spent time with this, even as we start to plan out our responses to injustice, and very importantly, if we start to be proactive to prevent injustice, then we will start to say, hey, what am I willing to sacrifice to help humanity get to where it needs to be? Some people tell me I ought to go to bed. I need more rest. I said, sometimes I'm going to have to sacrifice some sleep. I got to think this thing through and pray sometimes through the night to help get us to where we want to be. I don't do that all the time because sleep is good for you. But sometimes you have to say, okay, what am I willing to give up to get to where we want to be? I believe nonviolence in a real true sense, when we practice it with spiritual formation, is a sacrament. And I looked up this word and I said, I've been studying the word grace for years. And it says a sacrament is a ceremony that's an imparting of divine grace. And I believe nonviolence is full of grace. Kenyan nonviolence, you start to say, I need the divine in this moment. When I looked up this word grace many years ago, I saw that in the Greek of it, it means divine influence upon the heart. And over the course of the years, the more I think about it, the more I say, for this thing that I want to do while I'm on this earth, I need divine influence on my heart. I need to show up differently. I need to be someone who, when other people are saying, raid the place, let's get rid of folks, I need to be able to sit back and say, okay, let's think about this. Let's consider what we do spiritually and how that translates into what we do externally. How do I have inside out nonviolence? I want to pause there for a moment and see if there are any comments or anything anybody wants to share in the chat room before we go into these facets. Of course, I want to share with you and invite you as I'm going through these that you to look at the King Center website, to study nonviolence, kingcenterinstitute.org. There's an online course that the King Center has put together that's self-paced, that certainly goes into more detail. I just want to highlight some things, some of my thoughts that help me to live nonviolence and to be a practitioner. These facets, nonviolence is tangible. It's inspirational. It influences. I have a hoodie line that I just dropped, and one of the words that I put on a hoodie is atmosphere. I believe that nonviolence helps me to be an atmosphere. People start to know that you stand for something differently. There are folks that call me and they want to do a protest, but they know that the type of protest they're planning, I'm probably going to say, well, let's sit down and develop some more strategy around that. Let's think about it. And so they'll tell me, well, this is what we're planning. And I start to realize, okay, this is a place of influence, because especially for younger generations to come to somebody older and say, what do you think about this? Can you help us talk through this? I become prayerful because I know this is a moment to influence with nonviolence and to say, okay, if you do this, this is possibly your outcome. So sometimes it's not you're doing this wrong. I venture to say often that's not it. It is, how can we influence? How can we have a spiritual discipline where we say, I want to show up for a generation that believes they want to do something differently and nonviolence won't work anymore. But I also realize they might not know what nonviolence is. So how do I not get angry and start to say, oh, you need to embrace nonviolence? But instead, I show up and I am nonviolence. And I bring an atmosphere that causes them to say, this lady loves us. Let's sit down and talk to her. She might have some insight into this. It's relational. And I want to encourage us in this work that we do, don't negate the power of relationships. There's just the ability to love people, even people when they disagree with you. Nonviolence is disarming. It causes people to say, I can't believe they still treat me like this when I've treated them this way. But it's also very much about this ultimate goal. It aspires, it's aspirational, it's strategic. I'm hopeful that as you continue to study, you realize just how strategic nonviolence is. As you spend time with the King Center's online course, if you take it, you look at the strategy of it, because it wasn't haphazard. Did you know that Ambassador Andrew Young didn't go out to protest because he had to be the one to negotiate people's release from prison? Did you know that? That there was so much strategy from what the attire was to who could go out and march, that they actually would say to people, if you can't be nonviolent during protest, don't participate in that part because you'll distract from our goal. People will be paying attention to your violence versus paying attention to what we're marching for. But we want you to participate. We just need for you to do something else. So if people were trained and they found still they couldn't go to those lunch counters and experience that inhumanity without fighting back physically, then they were assigned to something else if they wanted to be, until they learned, if they ever did, that they could do that part. So it's strategic in the sense of not we gonna be weak and we gonna go out and people gonna put tear gas on us and we're not gonna do anything, but it's focused on that ultimate goal. What's our goal? Anything you're involved in right now that's about activism, that's about social change, that's about changing a system, that's about doing anything that you believe will make humanity better, stronger, more loving, more caring. What's the goal? Think about it. And how can the means align with the goal. Because to get somewhere, you got to be that. I realized that. To get a more loving humanity, I have to be loving. Dr. King wasn't waxing poetic when he said hate cannot drive out hate. Literally, you can't drive out a thing with a thing. It's a part of his strategy for nonviolence. In order to drive out injustice, I have to be just. In order to drive out militarism, I have to have an alternative. I have to bring peace. I can't drive out war with war. Can't happen. Not physically. Even those classes that I failed in college, physics, those science classes, none of that works. You can't drive out a thing with the same thing. And so it's also spontaneous. And it's internal and external. So people think, you got to come in saying, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to be nonviolent. Nonviolence often just becomes a part of who we are. It becomes a way of being. It's internal, and external. If we think about it, it's who we are everywhere. Who we are everywhere. So it's not, I'm nonviolent when I show up for a protest. It is, how did I even prepare for that protest? How did I get myself ready? Did I try to practice spiritual formation? What we're facing now as humanity, we have to literally say, when I'm about to participate in something, I have to condition myself. Some of us have to condition ourselves to go to work if we're going to practice nonviolence. I do. Sometimes I have to condition myself and say, let me get in the right mind. Let me get in the right way of thinking. It's who we are everywhere. If you think about Dr. King was stabbed. And after he was stabbed, he wanted to know how was the lady who had stabbed him. And I said, well, Dr. King that's who I am. I'm trying to be everywhere in engaging people. Because that is something that we're taught today, often even in social media, that retaliation is right. And so then we have to unlearn. I put this owl here because I feel like that's often how we look when people say the word reconciliation. I was like, what's a good photo for this? Because reconciliation has been so mistaught and misunderstood that it's the ultimate goal for nonviolence. But when we hear that word and when we've heard it taught, it's often been phrased as or taught as something that means we just don't agree, we're going to get along. And we don't have to reach any type of behavioral agreement. But reconciliation actually means we come alongside each other and we say, we agree that we won't engage each other in an unjust way anymore. We agree that going forward, these are the things that we will do concerning each other. And it also involves repentance. Reconciliation involves, in a lot of instances, reparations. Reconciliation involves justice. But check out this definition of justice from Dr. King. This shifted my thoughts about so many things, work that I thought I was doing that was justice work. I just happen to agree with this definition. He says, justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Justice at its best, justice is a part of reconciliation, is love correcting everything that stands against love. We have to have justice to get to reconciliation. It cannot be that we're saying to people, let's just get along. And there's such a tragic history of violence and things that have happened between communities, between individuals, between nations. It has to be that we're saying we have the human capacity to say, let's create a path forward that allows us to engage each other with honor and with dignity. Honor and with dignity. This can't be confused with false peace or negative peace, which says we just don't want any tension. And that's often what people are asking for today. We want peace and unity. No. A lot of people just want us to shut up and to not work for what's right. They don't want peace and unity when we talk about gun violence. They just want us not to talk about gun violence anymore. And they'll tell you it's the wrong time to bring it up. It's the wrong time to talk about the death penalty. It's the wrong time to talk about occupation and apartheid. It's the wrong time to talk about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. But reconciliation, a spirit of reconciliation says, a true quest for reconciliation says, we will not allow ourselves to be pigeonholed into not being able to say injustice is injustice. So any call for unity, void of being able to stand for justice, is negative or false peace. And our ultimate goal is not negative or false peace, but reconciliation. And nonviolence is the pathway to that. Nonviolence is the pathway to that. Because again, one of the main things I've learned about nonviolence is I can't be unjust and work for justice. That's hard. It's hard. I can't be unjust and work for justice. We think we can. If I think I'm working for what's right, sometimes I may think I can be wrong in working for what's right. I can hate people and trying to drive out hate. But I can't, because I'm replacing one hate with another. So I'm escalating violence. See, here's some core values which are connected to the 6 principles. And again, at the kingcenterinstitute.org, you can go and see more about the online course. The principles and steps are on the King Center website, but certainly we need, I did, and some more diving into those. But here's some key things, core values. Courage. It takes courage to be a practitioner of nonviolence, to work on yourself on the inside and develop a spiritual discipline that allows us to be a part of social change. Right now, it takes a little bit of courage to even be able to speak out against some of the injustices we're seeing, because there's such an attempt to silence voices that simply say, stop bombing children, stop killing people. That's hard. When you face silencers, folks who, for whatever reason, don't want you to say certain things. If you say, let's end Islamophobia, then someone's saying, well, what about anti-Semitism? And you're just kind of like, well, I mentioned that the other day. You didn't see it. But everybody's on edge. And so courage in this hour, I believe, means no matter what, I'm going to stick to this spiritual formation and this belief that I have something as a tactic and as a way of life that can transform people and communities. Nonviolence is hopeful. Dr. King says the practitioner of nonviolence has deep faith in the future. Deep faith in the future. Hope, faith. Believing that people and situations can change. That's a virtue, especially today. When I tell people I'm hopeful, they're like, what? Well, I got to have hope. I've tried to do this type of work without hope. And I've wound up prescribed Zoloft. And I've tried to be a minister and a follower of Christ and a leader in despair. And it's cost me. So I know I have to have hope, and I got to tap into the source of my hope. That's a part of my spiritual formation and my inner spiritual formation, and how I practice spiritual formation with people externally. Strategy. Developing ways to ruin hurtful ideas instead of ruining people is healthy. It's the third principle of nonviolence. Nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. That doesn't mean we don't share when people are behaving unjustly, Because as we see in the letter from Birmingham jail, I encourage everybody to read it. Dr. King had no problem speaking truth. He had no problem sharing when he thought someone was being unjust. He had a whole piece on Barry Goldwater not needing to be president. Mrs. King openly said that Jeff Sessions didn't need to be in political office. What they did not do is diminish the human being. And that's where we falter. Sometimes we think we got to insult people to get to justice and to get to humanity. But what we're actually doing is diminishing a human being. We don't have to do that to point out that somebody is wrong about something. See, so it's a practice. It's a part of strategy to learn how to eradicate an ideology without trying to get rid of people. You know, the language of genocide is when you start to hear people say, oh, we got to get rid of that group of people. I'm like, uh-oh. When I start hearing that, buzzers start going off in my head. Like, oh, any group. If I hear somebody say we got to get rid of people that don't want to be vaccinated, I'm like, uh-oh, uh-uh. No, I can't partake in genocide conversation. That's what I call it. We got to get rid of Republicans. We got to get rid of Democrats, blue, red, eye, you know, and we start to think about how to get rid of people instead of how to get rid of harmful ideology. There's a difference. There's a difference. And we got to practice it, because what we discover is we will spend our time getting rid of people, but we don't get rid of thinking. And then the thinking comes back. So now you have in countries now, people who are saying they're Nazis and they're white supremacists. And you think, well, Jewish people were liberated from the Holocaust, but we didn't eradicate that thinking. We didn't put teaching in our schools and in our colleges and in our homes and in our own social media that reversed and helped us unlearn as society that thinking. So strategy of nonviolence, third principle, we got to get rid of these harmful ideas. And I believe there's a way we can do that. Intentionality. The fourth principle of nonviolence is nonviolence believes that unearned suffering is redemptive. And that means that we don't retaliate, that we understand that we have to give up something to get to the ultimate goal. That's what they were willing to do. Amelia Boynton and Selma, if you ever seen the photos of the woman in the coat, the coat who's laying down, who's been knocked out, she understood, she believed, even before Dr. King arrived in Selma, she was working for voting rights. She was willing to give up something to get to the ultimate goal. That means standing in front of a bus just to stand in front of a bus. It means asking ourselves, what am I willing to give up for humanity to get to where it needs to be? These are the questions that I believe if we can get people in sessions where we talk about them and then we build our strategy for social change based on how we answer these questions, then we start to say, well, what are the demands we have that don't diminish other people? We want to apply knowledge. We need wisdom. We need wisdom. We have to do as Principle 5 says, we choose love instead of hate. That's internal and external. How I treat myself. We need focus. That's that Principle 6. Universe is on the side of justice. We need an understanding. It's a key part of spiritual formation that something bigger than me matters. That's how they got that soul force. They were out there for something much larger than themselves. So that'll cause you to say, okay, what's my slogan? What's my strategy? How am I doing this? Because I don't want to, even in my protest, diminish other people. I'm going to leave these up for you as we take some questions. Mary Grace, I know we may have some questions now. But this is the course of action that's connected to the steps. When you see the steps on the website, steps are information gathering, education, personal commitment, negotiation, direct action, and then reconciliation. The outcome of nonviolence. 6 steps of nonviolence, they're connected here. We need to discover, we need information, we need to have a vision, have goals, we need to connect. Who are we educating on these topics? You know, there's atrocities happening now in Congo and Sudan. We can educate each other. We need to align. What's our spiritual formation? What are the principles that are undergirding our work? Grow, work, communicate. I see a question here. What is something the regular person can do on a regular basis to shift our lives and mindsets towards nonviolence? I believe it is the study. I mean, I'd encourage you to read Dr. King's Pilgrimage to Nonviolence from his book, Stride Toward Freedom. The principles of nonviolence are something I think about and turn over every day. But then I think about, too, how to practice them. If I think about principle 3 even, the place that I've learned to practice it the most is social media. Because what we're learning in our social media spaces is we want to defeat people. But I've actually had to sit with some things and say, okay, when I see this type of comment, how can I, if I'm going to respond in a way that does not diminish the person, but seeks to share, to educate. And I've seen doors open that way. So I think it is in the really saying it is you start to practice it and you learn, and sometimes you don't get it right. And you come home the next day and you're driving home from wherever you were, or you sit in your house and you're saying, I need to continue to work on that. I need to continue to work on that. One of the things I also do, and I suggest anybody do this, is I align it with my other faith beliefs. I see how it connects, and that helps me think through, how can I do this? How can I make it real? In social change, in activism, that has meant for me being a part of some conversations that have been difficult, and being able to say, okay, let me see if I have the courage, in this moment to express or to be a part. Thinking about relationally, how can nonviolence help? Start to think about, write down when you study it more, how you can use nonviolence in every area of your life. That helps you be able to use it when you go into social change and direct action. I found that to be true, that because I'm practicing it in other areas, when it's time for direct action, I can stand in it. Because I'm able to say, I really don't believe I should be harming people. So in this moment too, let me stand in that. It gives us enhanced critical thinking. It does. So to answer that question as well, thinking about, Dr. King said, nothing pains some people more than having to think. I always laugh at that quote, but I found it particularly to be true now, because we have so many things coming at us. To sit down and actually just take apart an issue or a situation. Nonviolence helps us do that, though. So that also helps us to practice it every day. Taking apart, if something happens at work, if something's happening in the world that you want to use nonviolence to address, think about where that issue came from. I always share with Dr. Bernice King that I believe that her father had the greatest ability to talk about, to dig into, to expound on how we got in a conundrum than anybody I've ever seen. He could explain the human condition. And I believe that's because he was a practitioner of nonviolence and a follower of Christ, but also just believed in questioning and saying, how did we get here? So it gives us grace and strategy. And it helps us to understand how the individual influences the whole. And we get some holistic leadership too. We have another question here, or comment. I like the idea of hope and change as a virtue. What vices do I need to be aware of that combat hope and can impact my spiritual formation? Vices? Oh boy. Well, listen, I don't know about anybody else, but I don't know if apathy is a vice or fear is a vice, but I believe the most prevalent deterrents to nonviolence and love and action are fear and apathy. It's just, I don't know what to do. Hopelessness. And I would say rail against hopelessness. Rail against fear that would prevent you from stepping in or or challenging. I'm sorry for you stepping in. I'm trying to not use that word anymore in terms of action because I realize people are differently able. But just considering what are the things that cause us to not be active in changing, not only external things, but internal things. And it's fear, apathy, biases. If biases are a vice, negative thinking. I'm doing a 7-part series starting in February on changing my mind. Because as I've been sharing, when I share about it, we all need some mind work. I know I do. Mind work. That's where I need to shift my ideologies and my thinking. And sometimes I'll go down the path of negative thinking, that vice of selfishness, of just considering how something may affect me and my family. And I think that's one thing that's really causing us to be destructive now. You know, this idea of or wrestling with selfishness. It's especially when we talk about spiritual formation and connecting work to our faith. It is hard, and I'm finding, Brother Shane, for people to go to those red letters. Because what the red letters tell us is there was a human being, 100% man, 100% God, who was willing to, even though he could have come down and not sacrificed himself at all, give up himself for everybody else. And then he said things like, I'm going, but greater works than I did shall you do. And I always think, what are those greater works? I don't believe he meant better works. I think he meant more, because we're multiplied. And so then we have this opportunity to do these greater works. And so then our challenge is, how will we do it? Well, he told us in the Sermon on the Mount, which is where Dr. King pulled some of these principles, how we do it. He said, blessed are the peacemakers. He said, I want you to go be salt and light. You know, he talked about how when you go out into the world, this is your demeanor, how you carry yourself. These things we don't like. Love your enemies. You go somewhere and say, love your enemies, and get slapped in the face. Because that's just so far from what we're taught, you know, and what we've come to understand as society. But we have literally, for us, some of the things that I repeat often are these words in red that remind me in my faith of who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to show up. And I say, girl, you're supposed to be salt and light. So those things undergird my practice of nonviolence. That when I show up, I'm supposed to love God and love my neighbors. Well, who are my neighbors? Somebody asked them, who are your neighbors? This is also a part of my spiritual formation, where my neighbors are the people I show up for and the people I treat like my neighbors. So my neighbors in my faith should be everybody. And that's not about proximity. My neighbors are who I get close to, not who lives next door to me. So if I determine that people in Israel and Gaza are my neighbors, then I show up for them. And that's, you know, this teaching in red letters, this spiritual formation is so key to understanding how, based on our faith, how we're embracing nonviolence. Because then we read things like, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. You know, and you start to say, well, what are we doing to each other? Because whatever we're doing to each other, we're doing to the one we say we love the most. So it all becomes different. And that's true if someone's Jewish, if they're Muslim, if they're Baha'i, if they're Hindu. All of these world religions, they talk about this love ethic, kindness toward one another. Peacemakers will defeat the peace takers. Praise God. Yeah, blessed are the peacemakers. But we defeat this hate. No, it's the ideology. Somewhere we learned this, and somewhere we have to unlearn it. We have to unlearn it. And I believe nonviolence helps us to unlearn. So I want you to remember the ultimate goal. It's reconciliation. Now, it's a concept. I think I'm going to be doing a series on reconciliation with Georgia State next semester. But it's something we really have to dissect and understand. because with reconciliation, again, there has to be some repentance, some repairing. As that word reparation shouldn't be as hard as we make it as a concept, because reparations means there has to be something repaired. So you either need spiritual repair, mental repair, educational repair, financial repair. If somebody was diminished in their bloodline financially, that needs to be repaired. Can't get to reconciliation without it. How are we going to reconcile without justice? And justice is love correcting everything that stands against love. Core values. Talked about core values and the course of action. Listen, please, please, please continue to study this. If you listen to anything and you said that didn't give me everything I need just to go out and start to do direct action or to work on an issue, continue to study. Don't stop doing the work as you study, but continue to understand this becomes a practice. And especially when we look at the steps have to be undergirded by the principles. Because I want to end by asking this: what happens if we go out for direct action, but we haven't embraced the fifth principle, which is choosing love instead of hate? What happens if we go out and we try to get to the sixth step of reconciliation, but we haven't determined principle 3, and we haven't embraced that we need to defeat injustice and not people? What happens if I say I want to make a personal commitment? That's step 3 of nonviolence. But I have not engaged myself in the work of realizing that to get to this ultimate goal, I'm going to have to be willing to sacrifice something and not be a person who consistently or ever retaliates. That's how those principles and steps work. They work in tandem with each other. And the more you study it and take the online course and other sessions, we actually have at the King Center a 2-part series. 35 people will be able to attend in person at the King Center, other people virtual on January 8th and 9th. I want to encourage you all to be a part of that and just to continue to be a part of learning and studying and growing together. I'm super grateful for my time with you. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Red Letter Christians. Thank you.
Yeah, you are a gift. I mean, I think that, we saw all the fire in the chats and people were feeling it. And I think part of what we hope in this hour is that folks will keep leaning in and keep learning. Go to the King Center website, go to VonnettaLWest.com. Consider taking the Nonviolence 365 class. I've done that. It is powerful because you can go at your own pace. So we didn't want to overwhelm everybody, but we want to keep training ourselves in the nonviolence. And we were noting that disciple and discipline share the same word. We got to have holy habits that exercise our spiritual muscles, just like we exercise our bodies. So thank you. Anything else that people can keep, some of the questions people are asking, what to keep reading? You've said a lot of that, but any other?
Well, I would encourage Letter from Birmingham Jail, of course.
Yeah.
What I'm reading right now is Dr. King's Nobel Peace Prize lecture. It's called The Quest for Peace and Justice. And in that, it's different than the acceptance speech. I want to say that. The acceptance speech is great. Listen to that too. But that's where he actually accepted the award. He also gave a lecture while he was in Oslo in 1964.
Yeah.
And in that quest for peace and justice, he talks about the triple evils of militarism, racism, and poverty. Sometimes he called the militarism war. Sometimes he called poverty, excessive materialism, or capitalism. But he talks about those, and he talks about nonviolence being the way to address those. So some of the things I shared here, I believe what he says there will be extremely helpful. It's the Nobel Peace Prize lecture. If you Google it, MLK Nobel Peace Prize lecture, you'll find it. And it's also on the Nobel Peace Prize YouTube channel. It's not a video, it's just the audio. That's going to be the reading for King Holiday this year. I encourage you to listen to the 3 Evils of Society. That's on YouTube as well. Dr. King has so many readings. And if you never read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community?
Yes.
I just want to invite you into that. And Why We Can't Wait is his book that talks about the Birmingham campaign, and it includes the letter from Birmingham jail and some of the steps of nonviolence. It also shares how they would train people to be nonviolent as they went out for direct action. Very useful. I actually saw that demonstrated again in Nashville when we were going out to protest there about gun violence, where we actually sat in a room together and talked about, okay, this is what we're going out to do. So some of the things that Dr. King put into place that he would have us practice, we still can do those things today, and I believe they'd be highly effective. Stride Toward Freedom tells the story of the Montgomery bus boycott, and it includes his pilgrimage and the 6 principles of nonviolence. So there are readings, and if you want to, start to share, and we can have some more conversations around those readings, I'm certainly open to that, Brother Shane. If we want to keep talking it out,
we're gonna keep doing it. We're gonna keep doing it, y'all. These are tumultuous times, and these are some deep principalities and powers that we're up against, and we've got to keep remembering it's not flesh and blood, not people.
It's not.
But those forces, though, right? And so here's what I'm going to tell y'all is that we want to invite you to celebrate Dr. Vonnetta, support their work, but also if you can donate, go to Red Letter Christians, give whatever you can. We're going to try to keep doing forums like this for free. We're never going to allow money to be an obstacle to getting to learn from great teachers like Dr. West. But if you can give what you can, it helps us show some love to the King Center and to Dr. West. So go to redletterchristians.org and donate. There's a link in the chat. We've got several other forums like this lined up, and we would love to hear what you want to learn about. So keep hollering at us. Join us on December 1st for morning prayer. Keep checking out. If you haven't joined Red Letter Christians, we do wake ups like morning devotionals every morning. We got a cloud of witnesses that are singing the song of Jesus and justice. So thanks for joining us, everybody, tonight. And thank you, Dr. Vonnetta West, for being our special guest and letting us sit at your feet and listen and send our love to the whole community there at the King Center. All right.